And
Welcome into the Players Perspective Uncensored podcast. I'm your host, Larry O'Bannon. We got Ronaldo Murphy. And we got a legend in the house, man. Long time coming. Longtime friend of mine. One of the great athletes to ever come out of the city of Louisville. Montrell Jones, man. Welcome to the podcast, brother.
Man, finally, man. I finally, man. I've been looking at it for over a year or two. I've seen you started. You got my hand, Big Murph, right there with you, kind of choreographing things with you, man. I'm proud of you, first of all. And like you said, man, we go way back, all the way back to California Jets days.
Yeah.
People don't realize that you used to be a quarterback. I think, and I see you got some of your youngest sons now trying to play quarterback, little Trey and them and stuff. So, it's a pleasure to be here, man.
Oh, for sure, man. The first thing we always do when we start off our podcast, man, is we ask our guests about favorite bourbons, our go-to bourbon that they got, man. Do you drink bourbon? If so, what's a go-to for you?
I dibble and dabble a little bit in bourbon. I like good bourbon. Being a Kentucky guy, so I'm more or less of a Blanton's type of guy. I like to just kind of sip Russell's 10. So I got a couple bourbons that I really like. I haven't been on any bourbon tours or anything here lately, but as far as bourbon, I say I'm kind of mid-level bourbon guy.
Well, you name Blanton's, you name Russell's 10. You know what you're talking about. You know bottom shelf bourbons.
Well, I do like to sip good bourbon though. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with the wild turkeys, but I do like good bourbon.
For sure. Now it's been a minute, man, since we came out of high school, since we came out of college. But for people that hadn't got a chance to watch you play, man, who is somebody that you modeled your game after? When you were playing the football, or somebody coming up that you emulated. Who was somebody that you wanted to be like when you stepped out on the football field?
Man, it's a lot of guys, man, that I actually looked up to. One guy I looked up to back in the day was a guy from the Miami Dolphins named Rondé Gaston, those type of guys and things like that. I like, blue collar guys that always worked hard and things like that. Mm-hmm. So, I always watched the Dolphins receivers from the 70s and the 80s and stuff, and, kind of watched them and, tried to emulate some of the things that they did. I learned, from my high school coach a while back, Coach Redman, as we'll talk about in a minute. In this game, football is a copycat game. So there's nothing wrong with being a copycat if you copying the right cat. So I used to always try to copy cats that was doing the right thing, playing the game hard and things like that. And I would always try to emulate my game after that.
Right, man. I remember back in those days. I'm a few years younger than you guys, but I remember both you guys back at Male High School. But you specifically, Montrell, like, what was it like being one of the top dogs, point intended, at Male, and how was it like playing under Coach Redman and playing under that regime with all of those other top guys?
It was great, but like I said in my Hall of Fame speech, for me personally, it kind of took all of Male to, help me to mature and be the type of player that I was, as i.e. friends, i.e. teachers and things like that. And those are the things that I relish from walking through the halls at Male, of just knowing that it was full support, and I fully supported Male. And I think that helped me on a day in and day out basis, knowing that I had to support, from my teachers, from my fellow classmates and things like that. And, as a player, when you have those encouraging things, it makes it easy on the field.
Man, I tell you what, you talk about me playing quarterback. Well, you actually were a year ahead of me in age. So when I finally caught up and we played seniors together, you were actually the quarterback and I was the wide receiver. And before we even got to our first game, you got sacked in practice and fell out and broke your wrist. And so then I had to move back to quarterback and had some, move the other guys to wide receiver, man. We still end up winning the championship. We lost to Heights Point, who had about 10 D1 players on their team in the championship. But it'd been a different story, though, if we'd have had you back there, because I always knew you was going to be great, but I knew how special you were when we were in PE class and I saw Steve Spurrier, I saw Bobby Bowden, I saw Phil Fulmer, and you talk about these cornerstone coaches coming in to talk to you and talk to Coach Redman. And it just, I had to sink in for a minute because everybody knows I'm a big Florida State guy. And so when I seen Bobby Bowden and Steve Spurrier and Nick Saban walk in, I was like, oh yeah, he's, I knew he was good. I'm like, but yeah, it's a different level of good, man. So coming out of Mayo, when you were All-American, you could have went to any school you wanted to. What made you choose Tennessee? Because a lot of people don't know that Tennessee back then is like what Alabama was when Nick Saban was there. Like with Phil Fulmer at Tennessee, that's what current day Alabama is right now.
Well, the funny story about ending up in Tennessee, I played with a quarterback at Mayo named Jerry Irons.
Yep.
And at the time, Jerry had started, had a good junior year. We had won the state championship. And, he had started getting a little bit of recruiting on the trail. I didn't, guys, I wasn't really one of those guys that wanted to go to a whole bunch of camps and things like that in the summer. So, that's what a lot of the college coaches was talking about, how, Montrell Jones from Kentucky wouldn't come to camps or anything like that. But I ended up going to a 2-day camp down in Tennessee with him when they was recruiting him. And I was a rising sophomore, rising junior. Was going to, we had just won the state championship in '98. And I had went down there. And so I was, just kind of playing around. I didn't know I was going to be in camp. And, coach just kind of caught the coach's eyes. And they brought me over there with the seniors, and it was a history from there. They kind of offered me and things like that, and we kind of kept in contact over the next couple of years. So I kept in contact with a lot of schools, but Tennessee, they had a wide receiver coach named Pat Washington, who's still coaching and things like that. And they just kind of made it feel like, made my family feel comfortable, and made me feel comfortable. I actually, wanted to commit to the University of Florida Gators, but that was the only trip that my parents didn't go on. And my parents was real big on, like, I couldn't commit. If anybody knows my grandmother or anything, and my mother, I couldn't commit just off the bat, off of Steve Spurrier walking me around the back of his house. So, I had to come back to Louisville when all the chips fell. We just felt like Tennessee was the best fit. Out of all 70 schools, I say Tennessee was the best fit.
Man, you had an interesting, time down at Tennessee. Like, what led you?
Real interesting time down there.
So, like, what led you to ultimately leave Tennessee, and then, like, why come back home? Why come to Louisville?
Well, like I said, as a young college kid going away from the town, I try to tell my young athletes that I'm around now is, always have a plan and always stay focused. It's easy to get knocked off your focus when you're playing college sports and things like that. But, as long as you realize what you're there for and things like that, and never forget that you're never bigger than the team. At one point I thought that I was bigger than the team and made some choices that I knew that I shouldn't have made, albeit I was playing and things like that, partying, the college life, just living the college life. And, I tell people, I tell my young athletes, there's a time and a place for that. Like I said, have fun in college and stuff, but do it in moderations and things like that. And I always make sure that you see what I'm saying, that your character speaks for you and things like that, because it's tough to get back when people try to, kind of put you on a scapegoat type of thing of when, like I said, when I was at Tennessee and things like that, we were smoking and things like that. And when I say that, I don't applaud that or anything, but it's almost like, when you get some time with the in crowd kind of lets where you need to really be at. And so if I tell any of my young athletes and things like that, like I said, there's no I in team, never think you bigger than the team, and always listen. You see what I'm saying? And take mentorship. I think that was the biggest thing that I didn't do. That I look back on that I wish I did was take mentorship. And a lot of athletes, especially when you're playing at a high level, high Division I level, kind of think that that you have your own kind of brain pattern and how you think. And there's nothing wrong with just kind of taking the mentorship and things in, and kind of going from there. I think it's open, and we didn't have that. When you start talking back in the early 2000s and stuff, the things about life after football and things like that, even at the big schools, guys, they didn't have that in place really for people to sit down to tell you, that the game's going to end, where your mindset needs to be and things like that. But from that's helped me to, to this day now, as far as businesses and things that I run and things of that nature, that that I can go back on those things back in college that allows me to excel today.
You know what? Let me rewind here a little bit and get you to talk about what was it like playing for Phil Fulmer. And another thing that just popped in my mind was the great Bernard Jackson, who was also at St. X here. He was from Louisville, was down in Tennessee too. But what was it like playing for Phil Fulmer and being such a pillar of a college coach back in the day before he passed?
Well, it's more or less the integrity, the background that he built at Tennessee with the players that he had before and things like that. So when I got into Tennessee, he was more laid back then. I think some in his earlier years, he was a little fiery and things like that. But as I got there, he was more laid back, and he trusted his assistants to do a lot of the work. And that happens in college sports, in football especially. You're only as good as your assistants. A lot of people look at these top coaches as far as like, Nick Saban, guys like Philip Fulmer and those guys, but you're only as good as your staff. So you have to have a great staff and things like that. And that's the reason why, we're in a position, with our Louisville Cardinals of, even though we took a couple losses and things, is the staff is good. And so that makes Jeff Brom looks, how he looks.
Right. Man, so I wanted to ask you, I was looking back at a highlight when you came to Louisville. I think you guys played Cincinnati, and they came and stomped on the logo and everything, and you had like just a stellar game. I think we ended up beating them like 70-7 or something like that. Like, what's some of your memories about playing for Louisville, and why it was important to come back home?
I love being back home, and it was always good playing in Papa John's Cardinal Stadium because I always knew that I was playing in front of family and friends. And, you always want to be able to, play well in front of them. But like I said, just coming back, I give all the credit to, Tom George and Bobby Petrino for having a stellar program and having a stellar program that you can believe in coming back. And, just like those guys told me, we will win football games here. And that's what we did. We started a tradition with Bobby Petrino the second time around, should I say, that I was there with. And we started a tradition that ended up, carrying U of L to the point of where they're at today. And so, I look at the winning ways and, the steps that they've taken now. And like I said, it was a way that, that we paved that way. I'll never forget the first time that I walked into Cardinal Stadium. I kind of looked around and I was like, man, coming from 110,000 people, I felt like, I felt like I could throw a rock out of the stadium. I always tell people that story. I looked over, I said, damn, I can throw a rock out of this stadium. So, so from, if you laugh, from there to where it's at now, and, the alumni that's coming back, and they're trying to put the alumni into the fold and things like that. And I believe in that. You're only as good as your alumni that comes back and represents you too. So I like where the program's headed.
What's some of your fondest memories, man? Murph mentioned the 70-7 beat down, but what's some of your fondest memories that you had in your time once you came back, man, to be a Louisville Cardinal football player?
Oh man, just overall, like I said, being around a locker room full of guys that know the game, that knew the game, that loved the game, that came out and worked hard every day. Like I said, in 2004 at the University of Louisville, like I said, probably one of the best football teams that I'd seen around. And if you look at it, if you look at it and break down the numbers, I almost think it was probably 12, 13, almost 14 pros on that team. So, like I said, and Bobby Petrino coaches hard every day. His staff, Paul, his brother, Jeff Brom, all of those guys. Like I said, it took a collective effort for us to actually get those wins and things like that. So I think that's probably my fondest memory of playing at U of L, probably the 2014.
Man, good deal. So, man, after your time at Louisville, in the later 2000s, you were on a reality competition show called Fourth and Long, where you were in a competition to have a chance to be a Dallas Cowboy. Like, tell us, like, how did that come about? That was kind of like in the earlier stages of like social media and all those kind of things. Like, what was your experience like on that show?
Man, it was an experience, man. It was a time, man. It was probably all together, probably about 6 months, 6.5 months. But, from taking physicals, for the Cowboys to going out to California and stuff and shooting the scene. I think they started with over 300, 400,000 applicants for that show. And they dwindled it down to 13. So, to really even have a shot, it was just a blessing in disguise and been in the right place at the right time. And so the producers from Spike TV, loved my character, loved what I was about, the background and stuff. And it did help that, Bill Bates and Coach Joe Ivazano and them was connected to Tennessee. So, when I first got there, the prerequisite for the show is that you could have been with the NFL team, but you couldn't have never played a full season to be on the show. And so, like I said, when I got there and I, got to, and I wasn't in the best of shape, but when I got there and I got to, catching the ball and kind of moving around, they start calling around like, well, where's this guy come from? Are you sure you haven't ever been in the league? So they start calling, a lot of people and stuff to verify some things. But as they did, as the show went on, I thought it was interesting how they shot it. They made it seem like, that I was going to be eliminated the first couple episodes and stuff like that. That was kind of funny. But outside of that, it was a great group of guys on the show. Jesse Holly ended up winning it. Like I said, great guy. My guy, Andrew Hawkins and stuff that's on ESPN, he was on there and things like that. So, I met some great guys and was around. It was a great opportunity that I think in life that, like I said, I was in the right place in the right time.
I remember, man, a few scenes. Michael Irvin really took a liking to you, man. And he used to get on you.
Yeah, he was on me. He was on me. He was on me a lot. But he used to tell me, to eat with purpose and not pleasure. Yeah. And when the show goes on, what people didn't see is that, you see what I'm saying? Even to be in shape, I was up at 2 or 3 in the morning running on the treadmill and stuff. And see, the cameras was catching that. But that's just not what the crowd would see, behind scenes. So like I said, reality TV show. Reality TV is a little bit different. I wouldn't say that I would be cut out for it, even though people say it is. It's because it's kind of hard. But, outside of that, it was, like I said, man, it was a great experience.
Nice. Now, what was your biggest takeaway from being on there? What was the biggest takeaway that you had from being on that show?
I think the biggest takeaway is that, like I said, it is the appreciation, of just the game, of just being around the game and, getting at the highest, continuing at the highest level, people seeing you, playing and being able to play at the highest level, and I think that's the appreciation of things, and when you take that away, being around Michael Irvin, guys like Jerry Rice and stuff, like I said, you can, it was an element of knowledge that I got and I was able to soak in like a sponge, and I'm now able to put back into the community, as I was saying, a lot of players don't know where they were going to wind up at the end of their career and stuff. But, I always knew I wanted to be one of those players that was impactful after my career and things like that. No matter what I did, I had training business and things like that while I was training athletes. So I always wanted to be able to give back my gift in some kind of way, whether that's explaining it, whether that's showing it and things of that nature. Because like I said, you only get so long here on the earth to be able to do things like that.
All right. So what, kind of going into that, like what's something that you look back on that you're most proud of in your football career? And then what's something maybe that you did that maybe you would do differently, knowing what you know now?
I think my proudest moment I can say would be the Mr. Football from, because like when I look at the aspects of being a Mr. Football at male and looking at the guys that came before me and some of those guys and things like that, which was a lot of amazing athletes. I can go on from guys like Chris Pointer to, to Chris Redman to Don Bibb, a guy, Ivan Green, guys that played well before me, that played well and won a state championship. And nobody ever really, I tease those guys and nobody ever really, won a Mr. Football. So when you start looking at that aspects of things, a Mr. Football means that, you went out and done it night in and night out. And that's, that's the appreciation I get, hanging in Mel's gym, that, you know, whenever somebody looks up her, they can look up her and they can honestly say that that guy did it every Friday night.
It did, man. That's probably one of the things that still that makes me sick to this day, man. Because we had a pact. We were supposed to win a state championship in football. You were supposed to get Mr. Football. We were supposed to win a state championship in basketball.
Man.
I was supposed to get Mr. Basketball, but I couldn't hold up my end, man. We lost in the state championship. That, man, still sits in my stomach to this day, man.
And I know I was sitting there. I kind of sat there about 10 minutes afterwards. I couldn't believe we lost the state championship in basketball.
Oh, man.
And you know, coming all the way up there. But man, like I said, from male to, from like I said, from Jets to the male to, U of L basketball, you had a great career. And when I look at it, I knew that you was gonna have a great career when we played middle school basketball. People forget. Larry comes out, man. He's tall, man. Larry got these real thick goggles, man. and I'm sitting there looking like, man, they say this guy can play. It's me, Leslie Powell on the team. And then we in warm-ups, Ronaldo, and this man dunks the basketball. And I start looking around like, oh, this man is dunking the basketball in middle school. And so that's when I knew. I was just like, man, shoot, he's going to play basketball. He ain't going to play no football. So, yeah, man. So like I said, it goes on. And, another thing, guys, I talked to you about it, Ronaldo. I think the class of 2001, when you look at it from Louisville, and we can go back and forth to some other classes. When you look at it pound for pound, as far as basketball scholarships and as far as football scholarships, it might have been one of the best classes in the last, probably 50 years out of Louisville. So and that's a plus. So like I said, we're starting to get more athletes and things like that and to go to college and stuff. Basketball is not really picked back up, but they have some basketball prospects coming up. I was talking to Ellis Miles about that, about Ellis Miles' teams and stuff like that. So it's good. I think Kentucky has become not a hotbed, but a force to be reckoned with in the Midwest to go get athletes.
Right. Nice. Now speaking of talking about your time at the University of Louisville, the University of Louisville just put a beat down on the University of Kentucky, 41-0 this past weekend. Were you surprised, or what was your thoughts about that outcome of that game?
I wasn't surprised. I wasn't shocked because, like I said, one thing I do know about Jeff Brom, a Jeff Brom coach team, is that they're going to be actually ready to go. A game in and game out. I do know he's going to prepare him and he's going to have the right game plan. And then, like I said, his coaches have the right game plan. Me personally, I haven't had a really chance to say this, and I haven't had a chance to talk to him in a while. But when I break it down, when I was telling you guys about the staff, when I take a guy like Chris Barclay, and I really think Chris Barclay has to be one of the top running back coaches in the country, not just the ACC. He has to be one of the top running back coaches in the country at any level. And and that's the preparation I tell you guys about. When you take a guy that's a walk-on and go do what he just did, that kid had to be prepared by somebody. He was prepared by Chris Barclay. So that goes to show you from the running backs that he's had, the running backs that's been successful in the NFL and things like that. It kind of makes you have a joker, on your team. And so, like I said, Jeff Brom has a joker when you're playing with a guy like Chris Barclay that can actually coach and can recruit, and that's important.
I got a question for y'all for that just popped in my head. Like, as you said, he's one of the top running back coaches in the country. Like, how do you keep, someone like him? I'm sure he may, have some interest, in getting a head coaching position. And then, when should a coach, look to be a head coach? Is there a certain time frame that you should be in this running back position before you take other opportunities?
I don't know, man. I think it depends on what level your mindset is. Certain people's in certain different positions. You take a guy like Chris Barclay, whose mother and father's Louisville fans, who's in Louisville, who he greatly loves and around every day. His wife is from Louisville, went to male high school and things of that nature. So it may be a different perspective of how actually, you look at certain situations when you start talking about being ready for, that next level of coaching. And when I look at it and the aspects of it with dealing with somebody like Chris, I don't know, man. I think like it's the exponential growth for him is through the roof. He's to the point that, he could go to the NFL if he wants to. So it's not just college with him. Right. So, I always like to ride a male bulldog way, but, when you just break down the numbers and you look at the grand scheme of it all, he's been the joker of the hand for Jeff Brom for the last couple of years when you start talking about the running game and where that stacks up as far as U of L.
Yeah, I mean, you got Braxton Jennings, a walk-on. Your first 4 running backs are hurt. Your first 4 are hurt. So you go to a walk-on freshman and he come in, delivers 100 yards, 100 yards, 13 carries in the biggest game of the year, right? In the Battle of the Bluegrass. Then you have another guy, Sean Boykin, comes in, right. Another running back drops another 100 yards. So you got 2 fresh running backs toting that thing, carrying it 100 yards, and they don't even play the whole year. But kind of goes back to the point you talk about always being prepared when your number is called. Mm-hmm. And I think that's I don't think people grasp the difficulty of a coaching standpoint of how to keep these guys mentally ready, because those 2 guys could have easily said, well, you know what, man, we ain't played all year. Like, man, let's, I'm just trying to get through the year, man, and just evaluate my options and see what's going to happen. But, it's one game opportunity. Their number was called and they were ready. Now that, with the evolution of the game now, you get to the point of, did he create a highlight tape? Somebody else going to throw him some money to where, he might have an opportunity to go and play someplace else and grab a different bag. But either way, it all kind of ties back to Chris Barkley, what you said, a even better human being than he is a coach, man. Just having these guys not only physically prepared, but mentally prepared as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think, and another thing, guys, when you start to look at it, it's just the rest of the staff. You look at guys like, Brian Brown, who's leading guys that just had Tyler Shout, go to the state second round and stuff. When those guys are performing at a level, especially when you bringing those guys in, it's not only, transfer guys to kind of to intervene with your team, to actually coach them guys to actually go forward too and get to the next level. That's a plus.
Yeah, it is. And, UK really didn't look, that pretty offensively. I think they only had 140 total yards, the whole game. And so, I know Ron English has kind of come under some heat, these last few years, a lot of
had a great year though,
about his defense. So, overall, was it more so an aspect of, the offense doing a great job of exploiting things, or was it more defense dominated? What you think contributed from your football eyes in that 41-0 dominance? What was more so the key factors to that?
I think guys just came to play, and then not only that, I think a lot of guys that got on that field for U of L was hungry, and that brings up a different kind of approach too. When you sit all year and, you get a chance to play and you feel like, you get your chance, and that's just how it is sometimes, in the football world, you only get one chance to kind of prove, your worth and things of that nature, and be lucky if you get a second. So I think a couple of those guys, from even the running back to some of the wide receivers, took advantage of their, well-being and their opportunity, man. And not only that, Jeff Brom coached them well. He put his guys in where UK guys wasn't, and that's what happened. And then, when you break it down for UK, it's almost like football war, and it's almost like the coach is there. I don't know. It's something going wrong, whether it's Mitch Barnhart or whoever it is, something's going wrong with that program. And when you start talking about being in the SEC, I don't think it's Vince Morrow or nothing. It's a little bit deeper than that. When you start talking about being in the SEC and then you're competing for, the aspects of money and NIL and things like that, UOK's more or less on the lower end. It used to be Vanderbilt. If people has been following the SEC, it used to be Vanderbilt, and things of that nature. When I was at Tennessee, the funny thing is the 2 years that I was there, we never practiced during Tennessee week. They never practiced in 20 years for Tennessee.
Wow.
Yeah. That's just a little tidbit. They had never practiced for Tennessee in 10 years. So during that week, we do stuff like study hall and stuff, and it's just like a catch up week. But so therefore, when I look at UK, I just feel like that they need new everything. I think they need new athletic administration. I think they need new faces. I think they need new young faces. I think and what's so crazy is if you look at UK and stuff, they need somebody that can go in there and do some data analysis to see what's actually really going on. And the funny thing about it is I was actually watching the Colts the other day. When you start looking at the Colts owner's daughter and you start looking at the women that's starting to be involved in football and things like that, they're actually having a stronger role. And I think that they're good at that, the aspects of the data analysts and the keeping up the day-to-day things that us as men, can't do. And I think that that's what's coming in, just becoming more prevalent. A lot of people's not putting that out on the forefront, but that's what's happening in the pro sports world.
Right. I wanted to ask you, just having that experience of actually playing in the Louisville, Kentucky game. Like, what do you remember about it? Like, the day before, the week going into it, the anticipation of the game, hearing it from the fans all around town. Like, what do you remember about actually playing in the game?
Oh man, just the rivalries, just the hearing it. I guess it's more or less from the barbershop talk and stuff like that. That's what I used to get into, the barbershop talk when you go get your hair cut and things like that. How big the rivalry is, especially not having a pro sports team or anything. So that makes this rivalry even bigger. And when you look at the rivalry, you may have half of your family, UK fans, half of your family, Kentucky fans and things like that. And everybody has to come together as one, to make it work. But like I said, as far as the game on the field, it was always a lot of talking, a lot of jibber jabbing and things like that, the normal thing. But once the game was played, it was just, pretty much straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, what's it like, man? I've always been curious. I play basketball, and obviously the rivalry's big there too. But what's it like in a football locker room, man? Like, after a big game like that, battle of the bluegrass, you beat your rival. What's that like, man? Because I know in basketball, it's crazy. You try to act like, people always try to act like you stay calm, act like you've done it, like you've been there before. But man, it's a big deal, man. What's it like in the football locker room?
It depends on where you are. At U of L, it was kind of laid back. And at Tennessee, you might have a little bit of everything that runs in Tennessee, man. You might have, 3 or 4 women or something that you just see, just like, what are you doing in here? It's so it's almost like, it's funny, but yeah, like I said, it was a different experience from Tennessee to U of L. But like I said, overall, it was just good camaraderie. It was always fun. We always, laugh and joked and things like that. It was just, it's tough to explain. You had to be in there. Like people say, you had to be in there. But like I said, those rivalry games, it's good. Those rivalry games are very good. And I had it both ways. I had it from the SEC to the ACC. So I got to see the best of both worlds with it.
Man, I got one more question for both of y'all. I think, people from the city, they got to know this. This is something that is talked about all the time. For both of y'all, who are the top 3 athletes to ever come out of Male High School?
Oh man, I don't even know if you can name that. I'll let you go first, Trevor. There's a lot of guys that I don't even know about, and I don't want to disrespect the people that I didn't see before me, because like Montrell talked about, man, like just from the time we came into high school from 1998 to 2001. Not only college athlete, but like high major guys. There were so many. You got Chris Demery, you got the Richard Hart, the Charles Burdens, yes, Jerry Aarons, Chris Barclays, the Mike. I had 5 D1 players just on my basketball team. It's so many D1 athletes, man.
I'm gonna say my top one. I gotta go with Mike Bush. From what I seen with my eyes, I gotta go with Mike. Gotta go with Mike Bush without a question of a doubt. Coming in at a close second, I would say more or less in my era, I would say a guy by the name of Garner Byers. Garner Byers played football, basketball, and baseball. Jerry Earns. We can go on and on. Everybody, the thing about what I liked about male athletes is everybody was dual sports guys. Me and Larry long jump, but we don't even talk about that. We stayed long jumpers. We don't talk about that. Right. And so, like I said, it was just, what I liked about it is we was encouraged. Our athletic directors, Bob Stewart, they let Coach Redman do what he needed to do, and our coaches do what they need to do, and that's why Mel's always been successful, and I think, like I said, Mel's are always going to be successful.
Yeah, I think, man, if you're the two that really jump out to me, just from an accolade standpoint, I mean, Chris Redman was the National Player of the Year in high school. I mean, how many guys have just out of the state of Kentucky have done that to nationally ranked? He's got, I don't know how many records, national records. I mean, he's for me, just my personal opinion, you got to have Red Dog up there. I think you got to have Griff up there, Daryl Griffith. I think those two. Oh man, you got Dallas Thornton, you got Henry Bacon, you got Jason Osborne. Who's
you
J.O. could have went NBA out of high school.
You better say your sister.
Sharon, yeah, my sister Sharon. Those two jump out at me, and I'm sure it's somebody I'm leaving off. Somebody's gonna text me. I know Mike Bush is probably gonna blow me up. Mike is right there.
He gotta blow me up.
He's gonna blow me up.
He's the best athlete I've ever seen.
Especially because Mike could have been Mr. Football and Mr. Basketball.
Dude, he was
should have been. So, honestly,
he's the best athlete to ever come
like
out
80-something miles per hour.
Yeah, it was good. Mike was good at everything, man. Mike
best athlete to ever come out of Jefferson County.
Yeah.
But the thing that makes the things when you start talking about those guys and stuff about being good athletes, they're good guys. They're good people. They're good character guys. You see what I'm saying? You can talk to them. Things of that nature, from Jerry Earns and now, no matter how successful they've been, throughout their careers and things like that. Those are guys that you can still call up. Hell, you can say Trent Finley. Those are guys that that you can still call up and recognize and have good conversation, and they have great conversation with you and things of that nature. So, we can go on and on. Those were just guys in our era. I would, Ronaldo. It's probably guys that played before us that from '72. They ask me all the time, do you know about Henry Godfather from class? Unfortunately, I don't know about Henry Godfather, but yeah, man, it's been a blessing. I think Larry's hanging in the gym. So to be able to be in the gym, man, and like I said, forever to be recognized. Those are some of the feats that and everybody to go to Mel, they see it in the gym, and those appreciation things and stuff. I always tell people, it gets to a point in life where you want to be more appreciated than loved, because like I said, people can fall in and out of love with you for any given reason.
Right.
But for certain things that you do along your career, you always definitely want to be appreciated for.
Right.
I got one more, and I'll wrap it up. So as far as just the current state of like Jefferson County, like public school athletics, like how do y'all feel about Chris Wolf stepping down from Mel?
Well, it's bittersweet, because one thing I can honestly say, one thing that he did do, he was consistent. I will give Coach Wolf that he was inconsistent in what he did. And you see what I'm saying? Then I'm gonna be the first to be honest and be like, I couldn't tell you that he always had the best of staff. I will say that. But as far as his mentality, his approach to the game and stuff, he was always pretty consistent. And he got him a couple of championships in high school. only judged by championships. Even though he went to several and lost two, it's just the ambiance of making it there. It's hard to make it to a state championship, especially have to beat teams twice. And I hit on one more subject while I'm here, and that's why somebody asked me, where do I think Jefferson County is, and if they have an athlete, where should they go? And I tell people I like Cal. I like everything that Cal's doing. I like everything that Cal's coaching staff is doing. And, and like I said, I speak highly for those guys. They're doing a great job over there, even though that's right at the aspects of, lower level football and things like that. But one thing you realize about football now, if you got athletes, you have athletes, and they're constantly pumping them out. They're coaching them, and they're leading them on. I told somebody that, we have a lot of coaching vacancies in JCPS. And I said, it's a big difference between coaching somebody to do something and telling somebody to do something. Those are two different avenues. And, you get a lot of coaches and stuff that tell athletes to do things and stuff instead of coaching them to where to be and how to be. And, like I said, nowadays as coaches, you can't just coach on the football field. You have to coach in the classroom. You have to coach mentally. You have to be that supporting role to where people can come to you and depend on you as a coach. And if that's the case, then that's how you get state championships, and I really believe that, you can go over on at Trinity and, you look at those guys and stuff like that, they've bought into his system, and, they've done, and they do it day in and day out on a consistent basis in the classroom, outside the classroom. And that equates to wins, along with having good athletes.
Man, a few more shout outs before we wrap it up, man. My guy Rashad Holman, another two-sport athlete, Don Bill, the Ivy Greens. My guys, man, they were dual sport athletes as well, man. Some all-time great guys that played in the NFL ranks, man. So, I know I'm probably leaving somebody out, but they popped in my mind, man. Those are my guys too.
Yeah, great guys.
Montrell, man, I appreciate you coming on. And one thing I want to ask you before we wrap it up here is this. You work with the youth. This kind of, to end the segment, what is the advice and what is the encouragement that you give young guys that want to come up, that want to be the next Montrell Jones, that want to be the next Mike Bush, that want to be the next Chris Redman, Ivan Green, Don Bibb? They want to be the next, guys that really have their opportunity to rise and shine and, showcase their talent, not only for, the city of Louisville, but the state of Kentucky on a national stage. What's your advice to them, to be able to achieve their dreams and to stay on the right and narrow path?
I guess my whole thing is kind of be a sponge to the environment, and things like that. Squeeze out the things that you don't need, retain the things that you need. And like I said, overall, it kind of starts in the household, man. I had good parents, I had grandparents, I had a village, man, and I tell them, always rely on your village. If your village don't have it, try to find somebody outside your village that don't have it. Because, like I said, for you to make it, for me to go from Male to Tennessee to Louisville to be able to play any kind of professional thing, I had to have a village. And like I said, I had to be able to rely on my village through the good, through the bad, and all of that. And then, like I said, just continue to be a sponge and always believe in what you see. And that's pretty much it. And always work hard. Don't let nobody outwork you.
Trail, I couldn't think of a better way to wrap up the podcast, brother. Appreciate you taking time, man, to come through and bless us with your jewels, man, and tell us your story. Always a pleasure, my dog.
Man, anytime. I appreciate it. You fellas be safe.
You too, man. Shout out Tony Driver, too, man. Forgot about Tony Driver. Buffalo Bills, Notre Dame. Shout out Tony Driver, man.
Yeah, Tony Driver, man. Leave him cigarettes alone, Tony.
All right.
All right, hold on. Let's see.